Good evening. I bring you greetings from, as was properly pronounced, Wetumpka, Alabama. Not many places I go to where they pronounce Wetumpka correctly, but if you saw on HGTV, I believe it was a couple of years ago, they had a show called Hometown Takeover, and they came to little Wetumpka, Alabama, which is about 8,000 people strong, I believe, and they kind of made it over. Ben and Aaron were their names, so they kind of, they let a few more people know about Wetumpka than they used to. So we live, Jana and I'm so glad that my wife could be with me this weekend. We live in Wetumpka and worship in Wetumpka, Alabama, and work with Apologetics Press in Montgomery, Alabama, and have been there for the last 23 years. Apologetics comes from the Greek word apologia. You'll find a form of that word in a few different passages in the New Testament. Philippians chapter 1, verse 17. Paul was set for the defense or the apologiamai of the gospel. In 1 Peter 3, verse 15, Peter said, "But sanctify the Lord God in your hearts and always be ready to give an answer or a defense to everyone who asks you a reason for the hope that is in you." And so that word defense or answer is from the Greek word apologia, and from that word we get our English word apologetics. And so it's a little bit maybe transliterated, kind of. And so when we think of apologetics, we think of giving answers and telling people why we believe what we believe. And what we're talking about this evening is absolutely some of the most fundamental thoughts that we could have. And they are, I would contend, at the very core, at the very foundation of what we believe. When people ask, why are you a Christian? And you say, well, because Jesus came to earth and saved me from my sins, and He called me out of darkness to walk in light. Well, that I think is a good answer, but what if someone says, well, why do you believe in Jesus? Why did Jesus need to come to earth? How do you know that there was a Jesus? How do you know He really lived 2,000 years ago? How do you know He really died and rose from the dead? Well, because the Bible tells me so. And many people today will say, well, how do you know the Bible is believable? Why believe a book that tells you to change everything that you might, every way and everything you think and the way that you live? And like, hey, you want us to give money to the work of the church that you read about in the Bible for edification, encouraging works, for evangelistic works, for benevolent works? Why do that? You know, why spend time coming every first day of the week to worship God? Why not use the filthy language that the world uses? Why can't I just do whatever I want to do? Well, because the Bible is the Word of God, and the Bible and God has instructed us through His Word how to live. Well, Eric, why? You say the Bible is the Word of God, but I don't even believe that God exists. You see, we just kind of keep going back farther and farther into the most fundamental thoughts that you could ever have. I don't know about you, but I think that a healthy exercise is just sitting and pondering and thinking, like deep thoughts. Not, where's my phone? Do you ask yourself that about 3 or 4 times a day? What am I going to eat tonight? What time am I getting up in the morning? Where am I going tomorrow? Where am I now? Where am I now? That's a pretty good question. We need to, I would, I guess, encourage us to consider that perhaps the most fundamental thought we could ever have is just this. What's my purpose? I mean, why do I exist? Why am I here? You know, there's a whole book of the Bible called Ecclesiastes where the writer is basically saying, I tried all this stuff out in life. Like I tried to see if money and wealth would make me happy. And I tried to see if power would make me happy. King Solomon was one of the most powerful men on earth, one of the richest men on earth, one of the wisest man on earth. You want to talk about knowledge and wisdom? Oh, much more than I have. Oh, and pleasures of this world. You like a good pepperoni pizza and a Coca-Cola? I do. I don't need that very much, but I do. I like it. You think that a few pleasures of this world? I had a cup of coffee today. It was pretty good. I like it. Solomon had, hundreds and hundreds of wives and concubines. and probably the most delicious food that you can. I mean, we have pretty delicious food today. Have you ever, had a Five Guys hamburger? It's pretty good, okay? But, I mean, he tried it all, he said, and the thesis of the book is, vanity of vanity, says the preacher, vanity of vanities, all is vanity. And here's his point, from a purely earthly perspective, it's all meaningless. It's empty. It leaves you void in the long run. So where do you start? Where do you start to find meaning in life? You know that if I had the time, and I don't think I'm scheduled to speak on a particular lecture on morality and where morality, objective morality comes from, but leading atheistic evolutionists in the world, leading ones, including Dr. Richard Dawkins, probably the most famous atheist in the world today, have admitted that if there is no God, that if atheism is true, as he and others contend, and we evolved from animals over millions of years, then they logically conclude, if that is true, they logically conclude that we have absolutely no purpose and no meaning in life. Richard Dawkins would go on to say, well, we should replicate. We should, duplicate, replicate. We should pass on our DNA. To which I would ask, well, who says we should? Some people might say the planet is worth more than any soul on earth, and so we need to save the planet by diminishing the human species who's supposedly killing the planet. And I'm all for being a good steward of the earth that God made, but I hope we understand that that's not where our main purpose lies. And from a purely atheistic evolutionary perspective, no one could say that is our objective purpose. Someone else could just totally say, no, that's not our objective purpose. So my contention is tonight, as we begin to talk about creation making sense, is that this subject matter is of utmost importance and is at the very fundamental foundational steps upon which a person can build a rational existence and a rational belief in God and a rational pillar for Christianity. Creation makes sense. I mean, where did everything come from? We're going to camp out here for a while tonight. Where did everything come from? How did Earth get here and every other planet in our solar system? How did the other galaxies get here? We live in the Milky Way galaxy, but we're told by astronomers that we're one of billions of galaxies in the universe. How did the multiplied quadrillions of stars come into being? I mean, did everything come about in the physical universe? Did it come about from a purely naturalistic or supernatural? I'm not sure exactly what happened there. Was it caused by the supernatural or the natural? Was it caused by a purely naturalistic Big Bang or an infinite mighty God? I hope that's not me somehow doing that. I'm just pushing this clicker. See? Yeah, let me know if it is. We'll do something else. It's not me. Okay. Okay. Well, that's good. And hey, listen, I'm not very computer savvy, not very electronically minded. I just do what the phone tells me to do, right? Like, Eric, turn left here, turn right there. So what are we talking about when it comes to how the universe could have come about? How about cosmic evolution? I mean, what is this? Cosmic evolution begins with the formation of stars and, I don't have these slides memorized, planetary systems, proceeds to primitive and complex life, and culminates with intelligence, technology, and something else. Let me see. I do have, believe it or not, I do have my slides right here. I try to, just in case, I try to have a backup plan, but we'll do the best we can. And astronomers contemplating the universe, the story of life, the life of the universe and our place in it, is known as cosmic evolution. So when we talk about evolution, there's biological evolution, there's cosmic evolution. We're kind of putting it together tonight to talk about just naturalistic origins. Is it the case that we arose somehow naturalistically over millions, multiplied millions and billions of years, or did we come about by way of special creation? This would be a sample quote from a textbook about how we supposedly came about, because billions of years ago, all the matter in the universe was concentrated in one very dense, very hot region that may have been smaller than some period on this page, and for some unknown reason, this region exploded, and this is called the Big Bang. Is that, does that make sense? Hundreds of millions of people, billions of people around the world read those statements as allegedly factual, and they say, well, there it is. That's how we came about. There was a tiny speck of matter that exploded, and from this explosion came the Big Bang. I would contend that creation makes sense, and we'll look more at the whole biblical creation a little more thoroughly, Lord willing, on Sunday morning. But that the argument for creation makes sense because, first of all, and this is where we'll camp out most of the evening, and thinking about fundamental stuff tonight. I mean, like real, it's basic, it's fundamental. It is at the foundational floor upon which we build our faith. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, and love your neighbor as yourself. On these two truths hang all the law and the prophets. If you want to summarize the Bible, you want to summarize what Jesus has called His disciples to do, it is love God with everything you have. Don't just say you love Him. Don't just look on the outside like you love Him. Love Him with everything that you have. And then you love your neighbor as yourself. Jesus said, a new commandment I give to you, that you love one another as I have loved you. That you love one another as I have loved you. And that's some serious love. Okay, those teachings, they're built upon the foundation of the fact that we can know that there is a creator. Creation makes sense because matter, the very existence of matter demands something. The law of cause and effect, or the law of causality is the most fundamental law or recognition of science. Every material effect must have an adequate antecedent or simultaneous cause. A cause comes before the effect or is right at the same time as it and is greater than the effect. If someone says, I went to a baseball game and I saw someone hit a 450-foot home run with a wet swimming noodle. Do you know what those foam wet swimming noodles people put? We'll just say a spaghetti noodle, okay? That's not going to happen. That's not that kind of cause. You might flick a spaghetti noodle against someone's face. That might be kind of funny. But you're not going to flick it with your wrist and hit a home run 450 feet over, the center field wall. If I told you that Jana and I left Wetumpka, Alabama this morning and got here this afternoon. You say, well, how did that happen? Well, we walked. You can get from one place to another walking, but that's never happened. I mean, in a few hours' time, walking from Wetumpka to Albuquerque, New Mexico. If I told you that we flew on the back of a hummingbird, I love hummingbirds. Hummingbirds are unbelievable what they can do. I mean, we sit here, we take so many things for granted, brothers and sisters and friends, and we're grateful for everyone's attendance here tonight. The pattern of the wing, the beating of the wing of a hummingbird is different than most other birds. They can hover. I mean, it kind of makes me think of the Muhammad Ali, phrase. They hover like a bumblebee. They don't sting like one, but they can fly frontwards, backwards, up and down. They're like the helicopters of the bird world. But if I told you that Jana and I got on the back of a hummingbird and flew, you're like, well, that's ridiculous. That's silly. And you know that in less than a split second because you are using the law of cause and effect to make that judgment. That's not a great enough cause to make such an effect. W.T. Stace wrote many years ago in A Critical History of Greek Philosophy, every student of logic knows that this is the ultimate canon of the sciences, the foundation of them all. If we did not believe the truth of causation, namely everything which has a beginning has a cause, and that in the same circumstances, the same things invariably happen, all the sciences would at once crumble to dust. In every scientific investigation, this truth is assumed. If we can't understand causality and the law of cause and effect, we can't really understand anything, but we do understand that. So in light of that law, where did everything come from? Richard Dawkins kind of addressed this in his book several years ago, The Blind Watchmaker. Now, Richard Dawkins is a biologist, and this is what he said in his book. He said, I am a biologist. I take the facts of physics, the facts of the world of simplicity for granted. The physicist's problem is the problem of ultimate origins and ultimate natural laws. I could merely read tonight from Genesis chapter 1 and verse 1. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. The earth was without form and void, and darkness was upon the face of the deep, and the Spirit of God moved upon the face of the waters, and God said, let there be light, and there was light. That was day 1. We could continue to read that in 6 days the Lord made the heavens and the earth, the sea, and all that is in them, and rested on the seventh day. And I believe that with all my heart, I do. But I want you to know, and we want our friends to know who are asking questions about the reliability of this book. We want them to know that this book is reliable, and what we see in nature, and that a very study of the universe in which we live should drive us to the conclusion that there is a creator. We say, Eric, well, how would you come to that conclusion? Richard Dawkins says, it's the physicist's problem for ultimate origins. So let me introduce you to one physicist. He was writing an article a few years ago in New Scientist magazine and came across an article he wrote about the Big Bang. He's an evolutionist. Those are just some of his, I guess you would call them credentials. No doubt, very educated, very intelligent gentleman who's done a lot of writing, probably knows more about Big Bang theory from an atheistic evolutionary perspective than 99.9999% of people on earth. I want you to see some of the statements he wrote in this article. If I can get there. What put the bang in the Big Bang? He said inflation. What put the bang in the Big Bang? Inflation puts the bang in the Big Bang. What is inflation? Well, he went on to define that in the article. It's the ultra-fast expansion just after the Big Bang, through which the universe allegedly went in less than a millisecond, supposedly causing most of the growth of the 14 billion light-year observable universe. Okay, so I was a little disappointed right off the bat, because it was what put the bang in the Big Bang, and it wasn't really what caused it, supposedly. It's kind of what happened just, milliseconds later. And that was the inflation, this expansion of the universe. But then he went on to say in this article, he said there is little direct evidence that inflation actually took place. That's supposedly what's caused the bang. What's more, we still don't know what would have caused it if it did. So how confident can we be that inflation is really a part of the universe's history? But this is your thesis. Your article is titled, it's the cover story, What Put the Bang in the Big Bang? In a very pro-atheistic evolutionary science journal. He went on to say Alan Guth, who was a physicist who proposed the inflation theory back in the early 80s, and it was proposed to basically prop up the Big Bang theory, which was probably once thought to be kind of a three-legged stool, and then it was having some problems, and so it was like, hey, one of the legs fell off, and so we need to prop it up with this inflationary model. So we're going to prop that Big Bang theory back up with inflation, and that was going to help it and hopefully, keep it going. Well, he said that Alan Guth cannot prove that this inflation actually happened, nor can he suggest a compelling physical reason why it should have. But then he said this. He said within just a few years, inflation had become an indispensable part of cosmological theory. The only problem was there wasn't a shred of evidence that inflation had actually happened. And I remind you, he's the one who said inflation is what put the bang in the Big Bang. But this really got me there toward the end of the article. He said, we don't know for sure if inflation happened, and we're certainly a long way from being able to identify the inflation. In a way, we are still as confused as ever about how the universe began, but perhaps now we are confused on a higher level and for better reasons. And if you want to look at this online, I'm sure you can probably Google it and find the article out there. They might make you pay for it, like we pay for New Scientist and a number of other journals where I work, but at least now we are confused on a higher level and for better reasons. How would that work? If you went home to your kids tonight, or you celebrated with your spouse and just said, "Oh man, I'm so tickled. We're still as confused as ever about this, but boy, at least now we're confused for better reasons." I mean, if you're teaching a Bible class, or if you're in a Bible class and someone says, we're going to study this tonight, maybe it's on the existence of God, and I have to tell you right up front, I'm as confused as ever about this. But, you can rejoice in, I want you to take confidence in, at least I'm confused on a higher level and for better reasons. I don't think that's going to, go very well. It wouldn't if I'm listening to someone teach like that. A few years later, this same journal, they wrote another article about, what kind of bang that it was. They mentioned that for 30 years, Big Bang theorists advanced their theory on the back of inflation. The inflationary explanation was viewed as and I didn't make this word up, as a God sinned. Now they use little g. It once solved the Big Bang's problems. I want you to see that statement there, because they say it once solved the Big Bang's problem. Did it literally solve it? Did it physically, operationally solve it? Or has this always been theoretical to begin with? It theoretically solved it. This is not operational science. Now, I will say, there is a part of me as a Christian, there is a part of me as a creationist that is drawn a little bit to Big Bang Theory. And let me tell you why. It's not because of the so-called evidence. It's because if you believe in Big Bang Theory, then you're claiming you believe there was a beginning. A beginning. You're saying the universe wasn't always here, that it's not eternal, that it came about, it started. Well, there's a part of me that thinks, well, that's a start. I kind of like that. There's a part of me. But as we'll talk more about Sunday morning, there's the other big part. No, I don't believe that for a variety of reasons. Number one, because I believe it should be rejected observably, scientifically, and I believe, two, and very importantly, it should be rejected based upon what the Bible says. They went on in this article to quote various scientists like cosmologist Sean Carroll of Caltech, who said inflation is still the dominant paradigm, but we've become a lot less convinced that it's obviously true. And this article was written a few years after the one I just read to you. We're back to square one, wrote Paul Steinhardt of Princeton University. According to MIT cosmologist Max Tegmark, inflation has destroyed itself. It logically self-destructed. Some surmise that the universe, or now its universes, which seems kind of like a logical contradiction, uni versus. I thought if it's uni, it's one. It's I guess now it's kind of ones. You still have the same problem, whether it's one verse or many verses. Where did they all come from? Some surmise that the universe popped into existence from nothing with all its laws of physics intact. I don't know about you, but that sounds more like a miracle than anything else I've read. It just, whoo! I mean, do you see things just popping into existence from nothing and just work? I mean, I could use a new car, y'all. I'm still driving. Can you believe my wife won't let me get a new car? I'm still driving a 2001 Toyota Sienna. Both door handles on the sliding doors. The doors slide. We just don't have either handle on either side. And actually, one of them doesn't really slide. And that's okay. That's not near our biggest problems with it. But if it would be so nice if I could walk outside one Monday morning and there was a brand new Land Rover or, I'm not a car guy, so I don't even know. Like, I just need something to drive that's a little newer than 24 years old, okay? Just pop into existence from nothing, everything working exactly the way it's supposed to work for maybe a good 20 years, because I kind of drive cars a long time. It doesn't happen. You know it doesn't happen. I know it doesn't happen. But a whole universe, that can happen. It seems like we can lose our minds talking about some things like the origin of everything in the physical realm, when we're talking about anything else. The author said that one of the most profound ideas to come out, or one individual, stated this, in recent years, the holographic principle. The implication is that the world we see around us is nothing but a holographic projection of information from the edge of reality. I mean, hey, sounds kind of snazzy, doesn't it? Except it would seem to me that Toby and I, we could have a little experiment right here. We could just see if we are, holograms, if we are holographic, and you could say, Toby, I want you to get up there and punch Eric in the face. Punch him as hard as you can. Let's see if he is real or if he's a hologram. And there was he's pretty much world-renowned. Many of you have probably heard of Neil deGrasse Tyson, world-renowned astrophysicist, especially well-known here in the U.S. He was in New York City at the American Museum of Natural History at the 2016 Isaac Asimov Memorial Debate. And he was there, and he said the likelihood of the universe being a simulation may be very high. And this is an individual who claims to be an agnostic. He's not saying he knows that there is no God. He's just saying he hasn't seen any evidence for God. He claims to be agnostic. But he says, it's very likely that our universe is a simulation. Well, what do you mean simulation? He indicated it's not too hard to imagine that some other creature out there is far smarter than us. And then he said, perhaps we're just, quote, some sort of alien simulation. He said, it's easy for me to imagine that everything in our lives is just the creation of some other entity for their entertainment. I'm saying the day we learn that is true, I will be the only one in the room saying, I'm not surprised. Isn't it something how people will be more likely to believe that not only there are alien civilizations out there, but that those alien civilizations made our solar system and Earth as kind of a simulation, and we're just kind of their puppets in a way. They will say that they won't be surprised a bit if that turns out to be true, and that it was created by an alien civilization. There's a part of me that wants to say, well, you can call them what you want to, but you are created. Don't call them what you want to, though. Call them your creator, and then follow that to its logical conclusion. A few years ago, there was a television show on Discovery Channel called Curiosity. And as I recall correctly, watching that episode, it was the very first episode titled, Did God Create the Universe? And it was narrated by Dr. Stephen Hawking, who's now passed away, but was a world-renowned astrophysicist. And in that episode, he said, space and energy were spontaneously created in the Big Bang. So often, friends, what you will see is that people who claim to be naturalist, pure naturalist, don't believe in a supernatural realm or a supernatural God, that in order to make their naturalism work, they use terminology that they take from creation terminology, creationist. Space and energy were spontaneously what? Created in the Big Bang, but without a creator. What caused the Big Bang? He said this on television. I remember watching this thinking, how many people around the world are watching this right now? Not with a questioning attitude. And brothers and sisters, we need to be questioning. It is great to sit and question, now what does this mean here? How can I know this is true? What is truth? Jesus was confident when He came to earth to reveal Himself as the truth. And that truth flows from the Almighty, the Creator. Jesus is that Creator, John chapter 1, verses 1 through 5. Colossians chapter 1, verses 16 through 18. I'm not trying to use circular reasoning here and saying, well, creation is true, God exists because the Bible says it, etc. We're trying to show us tonight that, hey, we can see the natural realm tells us something about the validity of there being a Creator. What caused the Big Bang? Tell me how much reason is behind this answer. Nothing. Nothing? So you're telling me we're the result of a Big Bang, and leading atheistic evolutionists over the last couple of decades at least have said, but nothing caused the Big Bang. I'm sorry. Nothing? So ultimately what they're saying is everything in the universe ultimately came from what? From nothing. But you and I both know that in the physical realm, 0 plus 0 is always 0. That nothing plus nothing is nothing. In his debate with atheist Dan Barker, Todd Friel asked, and Dan Barker is the co-president of the Freedom from Religion Foundation in Madison, Wisconsin. That is the organization that goes all over the country suing school boards or suing municipalities and towns and counties for having a Bible verse on a wall or for having a prayer at a football game. I mean, they even came after the police department in Wetumpka, Alabama, because a police officer there, sweet young lady, she was having Bible studies in her free time, but since she was a police officer and maybe she may have been wearing a uniform, I don't recall at this time, but they went after her and the police department said she cannot do that. I was in the Panhandle of Florida a few years ago, and one of my friends is a school teacher there. She said, they have gone after this county and our superintendent and either filed a lawsuit or threatened a lawsuit because they had a prayer before a football game. And so then the school overreacts and says, well, there's no praying. Listen, we can't handle these lawsuits. We don't have hundreds of thousands of dollars to fight it or to pay it. So everybody has to cease praying everywhere. This teacher was told that they were not even to pray for their lunches in the lunchroom before they ate, which that's so crazy to me. Like, how can you stop me from having a thoughtful prayer? And by the way, yes, I can bow my head and close my eyes, but I can also look at my food and thank God for that hamburger that's sitting right there with my eyes wide open, respectfully. I'm not saying that we should be bullied into not being prayerful or mindful or worshipful or being full of service. I'm saying, we want to be kind Christians, but we're going to be Christians anywhere and everywhere with God's help and with God's strength. Well, in this debate with this co-president of the Freedom from Religion Foundation, Dan Barker was asked by Todd Friel, do you really believe that something came from nothing? Do you believe that? Says one of the most well-known atheists in the United States. He's held more debates, Dan Barker, than probably anyone else, any other atheist in the U.S. And he said, yes. And Stephen Hawking said yes. And after explaining what he believes happened in that television show we mentioned a few moments ago, about what happened supposedly, approximately 14 billion years ago when the universe allegedly came into existence, Dr. Hawking said this. He said, that's exactly what happened at the start of the universe. Really? I mean, this is what's frustrating to me and just kind of, as a Christian, I want to be careful. I want to be, swift to hear, slow to speak, and slow to wrath. For the wrath of man does not produce the righteousness of God, James said. I'm going to be careful not to be, get mad all the time and get angry, but it does tick me off that we're made fun of as Christians because we can't know that Jesus lived 2,000 years ago, and you can't know that he rose from the dead 2,000 years ago, but you're telling everybody on national television that you know how the universe started 14 billion years ago? Not 100 years ago, not 10,000 years ago, or 10 million years ago, or 100 million years ago. Whoa, you're talking about a long time ago, and you nor anyone else was there. You're just, some of your calculations, this is what it's showing you. I would be very careful saying or believing those kinds of things. In an article that David Shiga wrote, again, about these origins, one of the reasons I use this particular magazine is because it's a little more reader-friendly. It's a little more for the layman and not for the seasoned scientist, you might say. We get the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences. We get Science Magazine. We get Nature Magazine. Some that are a little more technical, and you wouldn't want, if I started reading from them, you'd probably yawn and go off to sleep. So these are just a little more reader-friendly. And in this particular article, the writer said, well, maybe the universe came about this way. Or maybe it came about this way, or maybe it came about this way. And so he gave all these different, what he would call possibilities, or the word he used was models. Maybe this model is correct. Maybe this model is correct, or this model. But then this is what he said at the very end. This is what I want you to see. This was his conclusion. He said the most likely outcome, however, is that none of the models will be proved correct anytime soon. Indeed, the quest to understand the origin of the universe seems destined to continue until we can answer a deeper question: why is there anything at all instead of nothing? Think about that question. Asked in a very pro-atheistic evolutionary magazine. Why is there anything at all instead of nothing? Why would that question be asked? Because nothing plus nothing. 0 minus 0. 0 times 0. 0 divided by 0 is always 0. How did everything come into being? Why is there anything at all instead of nothing? On ABC Australia, I didn't even know there was an ABC Australia a few years ago. You can go to YouTube and watch this, by the way. Richard Dawkins was on a panel with another gentleman who would have been the theist. He would be representing the atheist, and they had a moderator. And he was asked about getting something from nothing. And I want you to see what the world, I would contend, probably the world's most famous atheist today, and has been likely for the last several years, how he responded to this. Again, you can go check it out yourself if you'd like. How do you get something from nothing? He said, of course, it's counterintuitive. It doesn't seem right or natural that you can get something from nothing. Of course, common sense doesn't allow you to get something from nothing. Amen. We rest our case, we'll just put it down. And then he says, that's why it's interesting. It's got to be interesting in order to give rise to it all, right? Something pretty mysterious had to give rise to the origin of the universe. Amen to that too. This is how Paul would say it. Oh, the depth of the riches, both of the wisdom and knowledge of God. How unsearchable are His judgments. How unsearchable are His judgments, and His ways past finding out. Getting something from nothing is counterintuitive. Having matter from nothing doesn't make good sense. Common sense says. So if we use our common sense, what will we conclude about the presence of the entire universe, of the entire physical realm? Well, that if it can't come from nothing and it hasn't always existed, why would you come up with an explanation for its existence? I mean, if it was already always existing, Most people don't believe that most atheistic evolutionists don't believe that it's eternal. Then how did the physical realm get here to begin with? I love this story. I wish I knew who wrote it. If so, I would give proper credit, but I don't know. I read it years ago in the little magazine that you've probably heard of called House to House, Heart to Heart. One day a young skeptic said to an elderly lady, "I once believed in God, but since studying science, I'm convinced that God is but an empty word." You know, a lot of people out there in the world like this. There might be some here tonight, and I just want you to know we're thankful you're here. God is but an empty word. The lady replied, "Well, I have not studied science, but since you have, maybe you can tell me from whence came this egg." "Why, of course, from the hen," was the reply. "And where did the hen come from?" "Why, the egg." "And perhaps," said the lady, "you can tell me which existed first." "The hen, of course," rejoined the young man. "You mean that the hen existed without having come from an egg?" "Oh, no," said the young man. "I should have said the egg was first." "Then you mean that an egg existed without having come from a hen?" The young man cried, "You've got me all mixed up." She drove home her point. "Young man, since you can't explain the existence of even a hen or an egg without God, you can't expect me to believe that you can explain the existence of the whole universe without Him. Where did everything come from?" Friends, creation makes sense because matter demands a maker. So says the law of causality. So says the first and second laws of thermodynamics, which is just a long, fancy term having to do with heat and energy. First law says that in nature, matter and energy are neither created nor destroyed. Okay, so if that's what that's the law that is based upon what we observe every day around us. So how did it get here to begin with? The second law says that entropy increases, and that means that things over time are becoming, naturally, they become less usable over time. The universe is running down, it's not running up. It's not evolving, if you will. Matter and energy tend to run down to a state of less usableness. Just a simple explanation, if you leave a nice bicycle outside in the rain, in the wind, in the heat, in the sun for 50 years, is it going to work better after 50 years than it did on the day that you set it outside? No. Why? Because of entropy. Matter demands a maker. Atheistic evolutionists, illogically endowed, this is what I've seen over and over again. And I say this not mockingly, not trying to be unkind. I'm just saying this is what I've seen over and over again, where atheistic evolution and evolutionists illogically endow nature with the ability to behave supernaturally. I want you to see a couple of comments that come from Ken Ame's article titled True Freethinker. Supposedly, he said, "It is ignorant and superstitious to believe that God made everything out of nothing, but it is rational and scientific to believe that nothing made everything out of nothing." Supposedly, it's ignorant and superstitious to believe that God is eternal, but it is, as a few might say, it is rational and scientific to believe that matter is eternal. You see what's really happening here is people say they may be refusing to have God in their knowledge. All the while, they are taking the attributes of God and applying them to the natural realm and to nature itself, when that's not how nature acts. You don't see nature, creating itself out of nothing. You don't see nature acting as if it has always been and always will be. Supposedly, God is an effect and must have a cause, supposedly. But matter is the uncaused first cause. So matter is just really matter. They're spelling matter M-A-T-T-E-R, but they're giving matter the attributes of, G-O-D. If God made everything, then the question is asked, then who made God? Supposedly matter made everything and nothing made matter. So wait a minute, Eric, where did God come from if what you're saying is true? I mean, if God made everything, well, who made God? Where did God come from? And I understand why people ask this question. I understand why people think this way, because we see life beginning and ending on a regular basis. And it is a beautiful thing to see a child born to this world. And our hearts hurt and ache when loved ones precede us in death. If they're Christians, we don't have to need to be sad for them. If they've been promised a better life in the beyond, but we hurt for them. And so we see life beginning and ending. We see things starting and ending. And so we think in terms in these finite terms. So I understand why the question's asked, but the question is actually illogical. It's a very illogical question. Though again, I probably have asked it various times in my life, especially when I was younger. It's like asking, if we put on the screen tonight, when did eternity begin? What would you say? Say, that's a silly question. Why? Because what? Because by definition, eternity didn't have a beginning. What if we said, when does eternity end? You would say basically the same thing. Eric, by definition, eternity doesn't have an ending. Well, guess what? By definition, the God that we're talking about, by definition, He is from everlasting to everlasting. Number one, I would say that nature demands the existence of such a being, and that the Bible tells us, defines that being for us. Furthermore, by the way, our understanding of causes and effects, they're based upon what we see and what we study in the material realm. And God is not material, right? God is spiritual. And so physical laws don't apply to spiritual beings. People might say, well, I don't like that. Well, that's just the way it is. When we study something under a microscope, we're studying something physical. And oftentimes people laugh at, oh, you Christians, y'all are crazy. You say that you can prove God exists, but you can't put Him under a microscope and show me. No, we really can't. That's not how we prove that there is a God. What we do have at our fingertips are evidences, cases, logical arguments that can be made for God's existence. And that's what we're talking about tonight, and what we're going to be talking about more this weekend. Where did everything come from? Well, as the Hebrews writer said, every house is built by someone, but He who built all things is God. Both heaven and earth reveal that the things which are seen were not made of things which are visible. God created the heavens and the earth. I believe that this is logical, that this is truly in harmony with what we see around us, and it is absolutely in harmony with what we see in Scripture. And I think it is so appropriate that the fundamental foundational statement that is really the beginning of it all is the very beginning and the very first statement in the Bible. That it begins with, in the beginning, God created everything that was created. He created the heavens and the earth, and throughout the rest of those 6 days of creation, He created everything in the heavens and on the earth. Something that, again, Lord willing, we'll talk more about on Sunday morning in the Bible class period. I will say, if there is some free literature in the back, Jana and I toted a couple of about 45, 50-pound suitcases full of material. Anything in the back that looks like journals or magazines, those are all free. Please take those. There's also a little book in the back that I would highly recommend, not because I co-authored it, but I think it's good stuff. It's simple to understand. It's some of the things that we've talked about tonight. It's called Reasons to Believe. They're only $5 a piece. It's a 100-page book. I mean, listen, you can't buy a Coke and a candy bar at a gas station hardly for $5 these days. Whew, are things as expensive out here as they are back home? And so the 4 chapters, it's just a 4-chapter book. 7 reasons to believe in God. Let's see, 3 reasons to believe the Bible, if I remember correctly. 5 reasons to believe in Jesus. Is that confusing you as I'm holding up my fingers this way? And chapter 4 is 4 reasons to do more than just, quote unquote, believe. But in that first chapter, 7 reasons to believe in God, reason number 1 is matter demands a maker. The other 6 reasons we didn't get to tonight, but they would include things like life demands a life giver. Intelligence demands an intelligent creator. Complex functional design demands an intelligent designer. Objective morality, if there is such, and I tell you what, may God help us if there's not such. You want to live in a world where murder is fine, where stealing is fine? You can't say one way or another whether someone should be arrested or put in jail for committing some heinous crime? You see, you couldn't logically do that if morality is not objective. But if there is such a thing as objective morality, then there must have been an objective law, moral lawgiver. And if there is a book on this planet that has supernatural attributes, which I would contend the Bible has, and we talk about that some in the book, then there must have been a supernatural author of such a book. And if there ever was someone who lived on this earth, who walked on water, who calmed storms, who healed the blind, healed the sick, raised the dead, and rose himself from the dead, if that person exists, then there is a God. You know, a few years ago, I believe it was in his debate with my colleague Kyle Butt, Dan Barker, whom we quoted earlier, in 2009. I believe it was in that debate, but if you read the book, you'll find out exactly where he said it. I just can't recall right now. He was asked about, what would change his mind about maybe there being a God. And I may be getting this confused with the statement by Richard Dawkins, which is why I probably shouldn't do this without a slide. One of those 2 guys said something to this effect. And now that I'm thinking about it, I'm correcting myself because I believe it was on that same national television show in Australia that Richard Dawkins said something to the effect of, if great big, giant, 200-foot high, Jesus-like character came down to heaven with the voice like Paul Robeson and said, listen to me, I am God. He acted like that was going to change his mind. And then he faded off into, but even that, it's like that wouldn't even convince him. Here's the thing. History tells us there was a man named Jesus who came 2,000 years ago. Secular history tells us that. Secular history tells us he was an amazing person that did some amazing things that people couldn't quite wrap their minds around. Secular history tells us that he died, was crucified. Secular history tells us that his tomb was empty 3 days later. And you know that the enemies of Christianity and the enemies of Jesus and of Peter and the other apostles, they would have loved nothing more than to produce the body of Jesus. When Peter was up there preaching and the apostles on the day of Pentecost in Acts chapter 2, saying, unlike David, who's still in the tomb, Jesus is no longer in the tomb, and it's this Jesus whom you crucified, who wants you to be saved from your sins. They would have loved nothing more than to say, Jesus didn't rise from the dead. Here's his body right here. But they never produced his body. I would contend the evidence is powerful and shows that he had risen from the dead. And those are 7 reasons why people should believe in God. So maybe you might want some of that material in the back. Hey, listen, you can also always go to apologeticspress.org and get thousands of articles, dozens of PDF books. Probably that very book is on our website, PDF. You can just scroll through it and read it if you don't want to spend $5 for the book. I don't make anything off of those funds. All those funds go back to Apologetics Press where I work. I'm so tickled to have been with you tonight. Look forward, Lord willing, to be with you tomorrow night. If it be appropriate, let's go ahead and close out with a prayer.